Are we live? And we are live. Lovely jubbly. Let me just go to the red window and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. Right, I'm Andy B, and this is me answering 10 questions for theists by Answers in Reason. I'm going to do this on the fly. This is live. This won't be edited. So if I repeat myself or go back to some point that was pointless, or muck up the argument, or whatever I'm doing, then please forgive me. But here we go.
Hey folks, Joe from Answers in Reason here, doing something a little bit different. Seeing as we've responded to a number of different videos of the 10 questions for atheists type kind, both from theists and atheists, we thought it might be fun to actually ask some of the questions ourselves rather than answer them. We do really care about the responses, and hopefully we can create a little mini-series out of them. Question 1. If you are a religious theist, what religion are you? And
I'm not.
what do you feel unifies folks of your faith? If you're some form of secular theist, which god do you believe in, and why don't you adhere to any religion?
I would consider myself to be a secular theist. And which god do I believe in? Well, all of them, really. Because as a secular theist, I derive what my notion of God is from something that exists. Because even though the intangible concepts that we can think of that are gods purely exist in our minds as imaginary things, we have to have had some sort of perception of something that exists to have the sensory notion and the brain waves and chemicals and electrical signals and whatnot that bring about what our imagination can think of. And then we had to quantify that into a concept, and we had to call that God, or gods, many of them. And this is why I'm a secular theist. I believe there is something that we intuitively pick up on that exists in the universe that we have to quantify in some sort of way, and that the word we came up with to quantify what we perceived was God, or gods. So there we go.
Question 2. If there was any religion that was completely different to your own, that you could choose to be true and proven to be true to the entire world, which would it be? Now, I'm not talking about a denomination that you see quite as different as yours. If you're a Christian, don't pick another form of Christianity or even Judaism. Think about something really out there like ancient Norse mythology or Hinduism.
Right, let's go back a tiny bit just to bring up the question. If there was one religion completely different to your own that you could choose to be true, what would it be and why? Well, that's a tricky question because I'm not religious and I haven't looked into religions past the Abrahamic ones in any real depth. So the kind of paganistic mythologies that existed before the Abrahamic religions, where it seemed that gods were the forces of nature in a way, and the forces of emotion that make us produce our actions. That would be what I would connect to the most, but it seems that the results of Buddhism kind of speak for themselves in terms of a peaceful, fully working coexistence with each other. So it would come down to those two, and I can't really pick one. So either the paganistic polytheism that describes the gods as the forces of nature and the emotional connections that we act upon, because that would be how we derive what gods are or were, or Buddhism.
Any out there, like ancient Norse mythology or Hinduism. Question 3. What's your favourite verse or story from your holy book?
Just to bring that back up. I don't have a holy book because I am not a religious theist. I'm a secular theist. But if there was any one verse from any holy book that I think I would connect to the most, it would be John 1:1 from the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Because that kind of symbolizes what I think gods are. They're just concepts, and for a concept you need a word to describe it, and so word being God would ultimately describe what I think, and it being the first kind of connects to the Christian notion of a God that created the universe, which is true with the Abrahamic religions, and what happens within that universe that acts upon us that we can witness and perceive. That would be what I was going on about with the paganistic polytheist kind of things that were before the Abrahamic religions. So John 1:1.
Question 3. What's your favourite verse or story from your holy book? Question 4. If there was one thing you could choose not to be true about your religion, what would it be?
Seeing as I don't hold to a religion, that's slightly difficult to answer. But there was one thing that I wish was not true about what I could quantify my religion to be, then it would be atheism. It would be that there is no kind of qualified singular word that derives a notion of something that is, or of how we came to have consciousness to perceive what is. So if there was one thing that I wish was not true about secular theism, it was that there would atheism, because I believe that whoever you are, whatever you think, you know that you have consciousness, you know that it can perceive things, you know that there are invisible kind of intangible things that work in the universe upon us, and that's what brings about our impulses to act, and that's what I would quantify as God. So there we go. It would be that people would think that God exists because they would have the notion of God just being the intangible things in the universe that we know act, but we can't see them.
As an example, the other day someone told me on Twitter that they wished pets would go to heaven with them.
That's a good thing, but that's something you wish was true, not something you wish was not true. So...
Question 5. What are some of the worst arguments you hear us atheists making?
That God is some sort of spaghetti god in the sky that's an ultimate conscious that created everything. The atheist depiction of God being directly derived from a literal interpretation of what comes forth in the New Testament. That's the argument. The argument of why God can't exist. I was watching a video earlier, T-Jump was debating with someone about, is there evidence that God exists? And the person he was debating with tried explaining what I explained earlier, that there is physical existence of something that we can perceive that creates a neural signal that forms an image or a concept in our mind, and that concept of what gives us the ability to perceive anything, or that there are things to perceive. That's what I would call God. That's what the person T-Jump was debating was calling God. It's just God is a word. That word is a concept. That concept is that there is something that made us perceive the universe as it is, and that because we have the ability to choose our actions, and there are impulses that drive our actions, that there is something that gave that to us, even if it is only the fact that we can conceptualize that as word or image or perception itself or consciousness. All of those three things: consciousness, image, and perception.
Question 6. If there was a behaviour from your fellow theists that you wish you could change, what would it be and why?
Recognizing the for my fellow theists, the problem is I don't meet many of my fellow theists. Secular theism doesn't seem to be as wide of a thing as I can imagine, or that people don't look at the religions as something that came out of the want to have this anthropomorphic concept that there is something in the universe that brought it into being and allowed us to perceive it, and that gave us the consciousness to think about it and to come up with what we should do with our lives because of it. So if there was one behaviour that I could change from secular theists, it's not behaviour as such. It would be a thought or a worldview or a notion or a concept. So if there was one behaviour you could change from your fellow believers, what would it be? It would be the inability to want to grasp that God is just a word, that is a concept, and that from that concept we can derive where religions came from, why religions exists, why gods were put forward as existing, why the stories were told and the oral tradition was created that eventually got written down and, you know, became fables and stories to explain exactly what people perceived that this God wanted humanity to do. So if there was one behaviour I would change, it would be that people would understand that, instead of wiping it off as, oh, this is all fuddy-duddy storytelling to try and impose some sort of patriarchal, you know, top-down hierarchical, someone's got to be in control and we can use the excuse God and religion to enforce it upon the world. So that's what I would change.
Why? Question 7. What movie do you feel gives the most accurate representation of your faith?
That's a tricky one. Because I don't know if there is anything that gives a representation of my faith. There are stories in films that react upon the notion that, from the Christian perspective, that if there was a perfect embodied being who was willing to forgive people for the indiscretions that they caused each other, and to ultimately sacrifice themselves for the well-being of all, there was a series in Netflix, something to do with space. I will look it up on my phone quickly. Please forgive me for doing this, but we shall come back to it. Netflix. cartoon. Final Space. If you watch Final Space, the storyline of that is that there are some people lost in space, and that in the end of it, someone commits the ultimate selfless act of self-sacrifice, while first explaining why he forgave people for their indiscretions and that he apologized for the faults that he had made, and that to save the people around him, he would sacrifice himself for the greater good. The Christian notion. So, as far as my secular theism relates to a worldview, in terms of Christianity, that would be it. Final Space on Netflix.
Gives the most accurate representation of your faith. Going back as far as you remember, have you always been a theist? Has it always been the same God? Have you ever changed denomination? If so, from what to what?
So let's bring that back up. Have I always been a theist? No. Has it always been the same God? Well, if I wasn't always a theist, it wouldn't have been always the same God. I had the notion that people believed in God, but as before I came to what I believe now, it would be I had the atheist view that if what was described as God or gods was literal and there were actual conscious ethereal beings that presented their will upon the world, it's an unbelievable notion because they're not physical, they're not tangible, you can't see them, you can't witness what they're doing, and all you can read is stories about them. But as Peterson says, there are truths within those stories that relate to our psychological notions of what we gain from relationships and witnessing people, and our evolutionary biology, and how we select mates and live our lives, and how we emotionally connect to one another. So it hasn't always been the same God because it wasn't a God that I believed in beforehand. It was the atheist notion that everything's derived from our own psychology, that our psychology is just some physical electrochemical process in the brain, and there we go. Have I ever changed religion or denomination? Yes, I went from being an atheist with the common atheist put forward arguments to thinking about it, and then I became a secular theist. So that was my change in religion, as it may be called. Yeah.
Ever changed denomination? If so, from what to what? Question 9. If there was one free paper or article that you think atheists should read, have a think about and respond to, what do you think it should be?
I think it would be because they're online and they are free, the Peterson lectures on the biblical stories. Because that basically breaks down something for atheists, those who do not believe in an existent God, even if God is only a concept. Because he explains conceptually, through what's mentioned in the Bible, how it relates to psychology and actual human experience, and that if you work from the bottom up, that everything is physical, that everything can be explained by what physically is, that we can examine the physical through science and then explain how we got to where we are and why we are and whatnot, then that would be it. To take what he explains in those lectures and then kind of just sit with that for a while and see if you can come to the conclusion that theism, or holding to a religion, is a concept. It's just a concept. I don't believe that there are literal physical existences with wills or consciousness that act upon us, apart from contemplating why we act, why someone has acted, what they were thinking at the time they were acting, what motivated them. That would, if that could come to be from watching them, then that would be what I would recommend that atheists watch and could consider responding to.
Question 10. Which atheist channels would you recommend to your fellow theists?
In a word, none. Not because there's not good content. They don't have things that people may want to watch. It's not that I don't like what they're putting out. I haven't viewed them enough to come to any conclusion that whoever's presenting on those channels has anything to watch or reject. So I'm quite, because I'm neutral about a channel, I'm not indulging in them, and I haven't buzzed around them long enough to kind of see which ones I like. Or, I suppose I could recommend Digital Gnosis, maybe. That would be about it. Just people who discuss things from the philosophical view of how theism and religion relates to real life. There you go. No one in particular. Digital Gnosis, maybe. There we go.
And that's the end of the 10 questions for theists video. I hope...
Well, there we go. And there's the end of my response to 10 questions for theists. So I'm going to link him because I left a comment on his video saying that I was going to do a video response, so he can watch this and go over it. And if he wants to have a chat, he knows where my channel is, so he can comment back. Or if it gets passed around and anybody discusses it and wants further input, then come by and let me know. Thank you for watching, and